It was slow on my end too, so it took a while for everybody to populate, and the Q&A was going in and out of being connected, and so I think it's a Zoom issue. Welcome everybody. I'm really glad that you're here, and I'm excited about the topic today. This is another one of those. I'm kind of going off on some of my own meanderings around relationships, but this is something I've been thinking about the last few weeks, and I've seen this pattern come up in just about every couple that I work with. I think it comes up in the workplace, it comes up with friends, it comes up with families. So we're going to talk about the connection between dependency, fear, and control. Or I should say the progression from dependency to fear to control. So in my experience, this is a really natural progression. I think most of us do things in our lives at like a 400-mile-per-hour pace, unless there's a really good reason for us to slow down, or like in the case of recovery, when the wheels come off and you just can't go at 400 miles an hour anymore, you really have to slow down and do things differently. So I think this dependency, fear, and control progression is a pretty natural course of things. It's also something that I think in recovery has to be addressed in all of its forms, because we can't continue living our life from a place of fear and acting out of control. We really have to move to something more mindful, and we'll talk about that today. So for the purposes of our discussion today, I'll say that there's two types of dependency, or two categories of dependency broadly. First, there's soul dependency. And soul dependency sounds something like, you are the only thing that will be okay for me, or I have to have this job, emphasis on the this job. Or if my relationship doesn't look like XYZ, then I've failed. Without X amount of dollars in the bank, I have nothing. So soul dependency is when we're looking at one indicator of connection, or one indicator of relationship quality, and we're saying this one indicator has to hit the point, or this one relationship has to be a certain way, otherwise it won't be okay. That's the key mechanism in soul dependency, is if it's not this, I am not, or I'm not okay. The other kind of dependency, because I don't think we can get around dependency, is mindful, or like Dr. Rob would say, prodependency. This is a recognition of our reliance on others with full awareness and acceptance of your needs. In the soul dependency, we usually have a what feels like a very clear awareness of the other person's shortcomings, or what we need from the other person. But in mindful or prodependency, we are fully aware of and accepting of our needs in the relationship. So this sounds something like, I do get lonely. I have a need to be with people. I want this to work out. Another failure would be disappointing. I love my child, and I want us to be something. Notice just the change in tone from that soul dependency, it's got to be this or nothing else. It's almost this white knuckling stance, to the mindful or prodependent approaches. I do have a real need, or I have a real desire here, and I'm owning that. That's my need, that's my desire. The next phase that we move into with any kind of dependency is a fear type phase. So we can have kind of naked fear, which is the recognition that what we need lies in the control of another person. So I need you to be a good romantic partner to me and not cheat on me, or my world falls apart. That's a real need. But it's not up to us whether our partner is faithful or not. So there's fear in that gap there. It's the recognition that the other that we depend on is undependable. I think that's true for any relationship or any dyad of two people. Whenever I need you to do something, or I rely on you for something to help me, by definition or by arrangement, you are going to be undependable for me, because you don't live in my skin, you don't live in my head, and you don't know moment to moment what I'm needing like I do. So that's a really scary position to be in when we have that much reliance on another person for our basic safety, our basic well-being. Think about an employer. You really rely on that person to be somewhat fiscally responsible and responsible with the organization so that you can continue to have a job from day to day. That's a huge amount of trust, and that's where I think a lot of that feeling of we've got to defer to the boss comes from is you're my gold giver, and if you're not happy with me, I'll be the first to go when you have to cut back on giving gold. Another part of that fear is feeling out of control and at the mercy of a relationship or relationship dynamics. And again, this is a very real fear. This happens. The, I guess, branch off of that into something that might be a little more healthy, a little more grounded in that fear experience is vulnerability. So a recognition of our fear and our exposure that we leverage into calculated risks. So vulnerability and courage are not the absence of fear, they're the full recognition of fear and the measured decision to proceed even though the situation is fearful, or the measured decision to not proceed because we're not okay with the risks. Again, there's that element of I'm choosing here. I have some awareness, I have some say-so here. Vulnerability that's leveraged into calculated risks may sound like this may not work out, but I'm going to give it my best shot. It may sound like I have a community, I have a soft place to land, I have some backup plans. So even if I do fail, or even if this doesn't work out, I know I'll be okay in the end. Again, we can't take fear out of the equation, but I think we can change our relationship with fear. One of my favorite books ever written, it's called Nurture Shock by Poe Bronson. And they go through in this book a lot of the conventional wisdom around parenting and raising children, and they debunk a lot of the conventional wisdom. And in one of the chapters, they talk about how the most important asset that you can give a child as they leave childhood is a sense of what to do when they fail. It doesn't help the child in the same way if you protect them from failure or seeing the failure. It helps if they're able to make choices and have successes and failures that they then get to decide what to do with. And that internal voice that parents or secure attachment figures can instill in them, this is a speed bump, you'll figure this out, or aren't you so glad that you have people you can talk to help you find out about this, or you can research this, or whatever. That's what that vulnerability leveraged into calculated risks is all about. Is I know that there will be bumps and bruises along the way. I also know some first aid, and I know how to slow it down if I need to. So then the last part of this progression is where we come to control. It's my opinion that every controlling behavior, no matter whether it's a benevolent kind of control, or it's like a gaslighting, manipulation, abuse kind of control, it comes from a base of fear. And this is where I think our relationships play a big role in the ways that we control, the ways that we attempt control, is because fear and uncertainty are part of being in relationships. So control is the outgrowth of fear, and this is when what I need lies with another person and we're in fear. We'll exert influence over that person. This can be control, manipulation, gaslighting, coercion, fill in your favorite synonym, to control them and therefore control our access to what we need. So if you need a partner who dotes on you physically and thinks that you're the most beautiful or handsome thing to walk the earth, you may set up those classic impossible situations. How does this look on me? Or do you think I look fat in this? Is the classic thing. So you can set your partner up to extort praise, or to extort the truth about what they think, and then flip it on them. Now, I want you to see no flaws in me. I want you to just feel good about me and my body. When in reality, when we put people in that kind of situation to extort praise or affection from them, really we're coming from an insecure base ourselves. And that's one of the places that we can work on to do that, to pull it back. I do have a need to feel good about myself. I have a need to feel good in my own body. One avenue you can take for that is to have other people praise you, and you can get at that somewhat. You can also take the avenue of developing self-love and self-compassion, or being in a, like, take for example the appearance, being in a body positive community, where it's not really about your dress size or your pant size or your weight, and it's more about living a healthy lifestyle and supporting each other and living a healthy lifestyle. When you recognize what the need is, you can, and you own that it's your need, you can move away from controlling behavior, and you can move into behavior and relationships that give you a better shot at actually getting what you need, because you're owning it, not expecting somebody else to give it to you. The branch off of that kind of control is what I would call deliberate action. And this is where we build communities. So in recovery, what I see often on both the addict and the betrayed spouse side is that feeling of this one person who is most important to me in the whole world, they're not reliable anymore. Either they're reeling from betrayal trauma, or they're neck deep in addiction and they don't even know which way is up. And so the instinctive place, and Dr. Rob talks about this in his book Codependency, is to grasp for your partner. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what a normal functioning person would do, is reach out to steady the people that they rely on. Sometimes, or I'd say often in recovery, individuals find themselves in a position where they don't have a lot of steady communities to reach out to. Maybe they've put all their time and energy and focus into this one relationship. Again, nothing wrong with that. But sometimes in recovery, we have to deliberately pull back and build some broader community. We have to get some broader support, because we have needs that may not be able to be met by this person that we really want to meet them right now. In deliberate action, we also practice boundaries. So rather than manipulating or coercing or cajoling another into action, we state what it is we need. One of my I'm rewatching the television series The Office, which I do every couple of years because I think it's just great TV. And one of my favorite lines ever, there's a character who's kind of known for being a little bit of a firebrand and always drama in her relationships. And she's dating this guy. And she says, Daryl is the character's name who she's dating. She says, Daryl is the most confusing human being ever. I mean, who tells you exactly what they're thinking? What kind of a sick game is that? That's the opposite of practicing good boundaries. Good boundaries are saying exactly what you think, saying what you feel and what you need. And it's not a sick game. It's actually a way that we develop some stability inside of ourselves and in our relationships. We create other options when we're in deliberate action. So if you don't like the options in front of you, you may do some homework and find out what else is available. Take, for example, a job. I was just talking with a client earlier this morning who knows he's dissatisfied in the corporate job that he's in now, and he's interviewed with several other companies doing what he does, and he says, I just don't have a fire for any of them. And as we were talking, I was pushing for what other options are there, and he said, maybe I don't want to be focused on turning businesses around anymore. Maybe I just want to do something that I believe in. He's creating another option for himself, and that allows for more need fulfillment. That allows for more healthy dependency rather than the sole dependency. Accountability is also key in making deliberate choices. And I would say if there's one takeaway from this, understanding this dependency, fear, and control cascade, if you want to break that, if you want to change that, if you want to shift your experience on that, you have to have accountability. Taking someone that you can trust on every step of this process with you. So talking with a sponsor, a support person who knows what you're working on, because maybe they've worked on it themselves, and telling them, this is what the dependency feels like to me. This is what I'm scared of. This is what I want. Talking to them about the fear. The fear is overwhelming right now. I want to blow up his phone, or I want to, text bomb her and find out exactly what's going on right now. Getting accountable about that fear, and then especially getting accountable about the control behaviors. Yeah, I did do that passive aggressive thing again. And part of that accountability is talking about how it felt. At first, I felt justified, and then I kind of felt gross, and I'm sad that I did it. Accountability is really, really important because it's what helps us hold the ground in seeing what we're doing, what we're feeling, and how it's impacting us. And in my opinion, these kind of like emotional and psychological puzzles, they're only solved if we keep reminding ourselves what the pieces are. Because it's really easy for those pieces to kind of float into obscurity, for us to lose track of them. And another living, breathing human being who's been down the road before and kind of knows what this is about is best positioned to help us keep track of the pieces. So that is dependency, fear, and control.
Thank you, John. That was really interesting. And I think there was a lot packed into that. So I want to try to recap for myself and for everybody else, and you can jump in with what I missed. So soul dependency, where I'm completely dependent on you to meet all of my needs, and I probably don't tell you what those needs are, just because we're not in a healthy relationship. Versus like prodependency, where I understand that I have needs and I embrace my needs and I let you know what they are, and you can meet some of my needs, and I can meet some of your needs, but I probably can't meet all of yours, and you probably can't meet all of mine. So, and this is where we get into, just taking better care of ourselves by reaching out to other people and having a larger support network, and putting some boundaries out and stating needs, and creating other options. And that way we're still going to have some fear, I would think, but we can not let the fear drive us into control behaviors, which are very not prodependent. Where I try and force you into telling me that these jeans make me look fabulous. So am I kind of getting at least the gist of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think any part of this cycle we can take ourselves completely out of. Like I said, I think these are the natural states. Yeah. And one of the things that comes up for me in my own recovery, recognizing that one person would not be able to meet all of my needs, or even a good portion of them, is the fear that came with a recognition of it'll take a village, and it's hard to be a citizen in a village. Because there can be a lot more uncertainty. There's also a lot more room for reward. So even when we're working toward help, we're working toward stability. That doesn't eradicate fear, but it can change where the fear comes from, and it can change the options that we see in relation to the fear that we're having.
Yeah, because if I go into a relationship with somebody and I expect them to be perfect and to meet all of my needs, I am going to be very sadly disappointed.
Very quick.
Yeah. And I'm going to live in fear of what need is not going to be met, in the next moment. And I'm going to become very controlling. But yeah, I think it's a natural state for us to do this. But yeah, I love that. One of the things that I pulled out here, you didn't word it this way, but we need to teach kids how to fail successfully.
Yeah.
To learn from it. And it reminds me of the concept of the too perfect parent, where the kid's needs are met 100% of the time without fail immediately. And the kid never, really develops and learns how to deal with disappointment, and never really learns how to deal with life because the parents are too good. We need some disappointment. Do we learn from our disappointments in relationships as well? Do we fail successfully in our interpersonal relationships in general?
This was probably a couple years ago. I recorded a podcast episode with Dr. Rob. I forget what it was called, but I talked all about some mindsets that were useful in relationships. And one of all was just remember this as an experiment. So you'll put data into the system and you'll see how that goes, and you can always adjust on the back end. You can always adjust on the next time around. And in relationships, we fail all the time. We let each other down, we get hurt, we do the hurting. And it's not really about getting it right. I think it's more about hanging with it that makes a good relationship. So you hurt me, and I'm going to hang with it. We're going to talk about it. Or I hurt you and I'm going to hang with it. And rather than shrinking back in my shame, I'm going to learn from you what happened and how that felt and maybe what I can do different next time. But yeah, failure in relationships, I think for a lot of us, our relationships feel so tenuous that any amount of failure is just going to eradicate it. And, there are times, I think, especially in some addiction recovery situations where there's been like affair after affair and saying, hey, you can't do this again to me. I won't do it again. There are some situations where we don't have a lot of margin, but I'd say by and large in our relationships, there's more margin than we believe. And we really have to be mindful about how we utilize that margin. Just because there's margin doesn't mean we can keep skating like we have been. But margin can give us more time, can give us compassion, and can give us understanding and another chance to approach the problem.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have both seen countless couples overcome things that seem insurmountable and walk away stronger than ever.
Yeah.
Because there is that margin, but they also set the boundaries and they do the work. I mean, yeah, you can't just skate and skate and skate eventually. Anyway, we've got some questions. So pop questions in the Q&A feature and we'll get as many of these answered as we can. First question here. I'm in the waiting period between staggered discovery, and a therapeutic disclosure session with my betraying partner or fiance. We're very involved in each other's lives and we share all of the same friends. This is a male-male same-sex relationship. How do we navigate handling group activities with others where we don't want them to know what's going on? I'm new to this world and I apologize. This is totally on topic. Don't apologize for not, you are 100% on topic.
Yeah, really great question. And, for me, I think it comes down to, we talked about margin and bandwidth just a couple minutes ago. I think it comes down to a bandwidth question. I'm not of the opinion that for couples early in recovery, your relationship business should be everybody else's business. That can create a lot of chaos, and you want to make sure that when you start telling your story, you feel really grounded in it and you're selecting the people that you want to share with, not the people you feel like you have to share with. So I would look at this through the angle of what is it going to cost me to show up and pretend like things are normal, and what might it cost my partner, what might it cost us? And those might be some of the conversations that you have, because there is a trade-off. You might be able to go and have a night with friends or your community that feels really fun and really diverting, and you may come home full of rage because you just witnessed your spouse who just betrayed you pretend like there wasn't anything wrong at all. And so I would really start with asking myself, how much bandwidth do I have and what's the price I'm okay with paying for this? And if I'm not okay paying the price, pretending like things are normal, I have a couple choices. Either I let somebody into the loop so that I don't have to pretend around them and therefore expend that energy, or I pull back from some social things for a while. And whether that's you make an excuse or you say, I'm just not feeling well right now, or I'm working on some things, whatever that story needs to be, in order to just communicate to people, I'm not coming around right now, I can't right now. But I think it really comes down to that trade-off bandwidth issue. Like I said, again, I don't think there's anything wrong with kind of taking a break from the intensity to feel something normal, but just know that just because we had a night that feels normal doesn't mean things are going to be normal now. And oftentimes that recoil or that whiplash, that rebound, it can be quite painful. So just make sure that you feel ready and like you've got room for what's coming next based on the decision that you're going to make now.
And within the friend network here, whether it's same sex or any couple, how does the betrayed partner determine who it's safe to share with? Who am I going to get useful support from? I mean, what are the guidelines for, who should I tell and who should I not tell?
Yeah, some main things that I look for is, first of all, you want to look for somebody who I think has a history of no judgment. If you have a friend who's a gossip, or you have a friend who, has shared some pretty stark, harsh judgment with you, either about you or about other people, they're likely going to do what they've always done with that information. That may not be a real safe person to share with. If you know that somebody's been through something similar, that might be a qualifying criteria, maybe, if they feel safe for you too. So somebody who already knows the story because they've kind of been there already might be someone that you want to share with. I think it's also important in these situations where there's a committed relationship is the people that you tell, you want to make sure that they're not going to pick sides, because for a lot of people in your position, you haven't picked a side yet. You may be unsure whether you want to continue in the relationship or whether you want to go, or you may feel like I have to continue and going's not an option. So you don't want to pick somebody who's going to insert their agenda for whether you should stay or go, or whether you should, punish this person for the rest of forever or not. You want to find someone who can just listen to your experience and be there for you. Picking sides can also turn into, I've seen in social circles that, somebody in a largely good faith effort reaches out to another person in the support circle and tells them, my partner cheated on me and I'm really devastated. And then that person is just cruel to their partner. And that may not be what you want either. So this is, like I was talking about before, some of that deliberate action. You may not have a community right now that you can be yourself in. I don't know what your community looks like. And so that's where, like, these kind of groups, meetings, this can be a useful place to find people that you can drop pretense with, and you can be real about where you're at. And I'll say, in my experience in recovery communities, it's not all doom and gloom. We've got this big problem to solve. There can be a lot of fun and diversion here too. And that's an important part of a healthy community. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you for answering that. And I would just add that you and your partner can still, while you're working through this, it is possible for the two of you to still have fun together. It just might be, beware of the whiplash, as Jon said. You may go out and have a great evening and go home, and then you're just really, really angry because it was a fun evening, and it shouldn't have been. There's all kinds of craziness that goes on in the head, and it doesn't mean you're crazy. It means you're going through trauma.
Yeah.
So, next one here, I heard Scott mention emotional incest. Mother and best man and emotional incest, covert incest, lots of terms that mirror each other. Can you talk a little bit about this? What does it look like, and what are the consequences in the child when he or she becomes an adult?
Yeah. So with emotional incest or covert incest or parental enmeshment, what we're talking about is a parent who projects a relationship onto the child that is not about a parent-child relationship, but it's more about a peer-to-peer or a parent-to-partner relationship. So, like, when one parent shares with the child the emotional and intimate details of the relationship of that parent with their adult partner. So, your mom's really mad at me right now, or, dad just isn't romantic like he used to be. I really long for him to sweep me off my feet. That kind of stuff is wholly inappropriate to bring a child into, because that child's job is to be full of need and for you to be a blank canvas for their need. It's not for you to have this child fulfill your needs in any way. When children do that for a parent, if that happens in a healthy way, it's incidental, it's secondary. It's not that the parent is setting out, I'm sad and my kid's going to cheer me up. It's that the kid is, naturally funny or talented or just, great to spend time with, and that lifts the soul. So emotional incest is when a parent does not keep appropriate emotional boundaries with a child, and often brings the child into an adult world emotionally. The consequences are, as the child grows up and moves into adulthood, first and foremost, the child can feel what we call a disloyalty bind. So when a parent relies on a child that much, when the child reaches a normal developmental stage where they start looking at, my friendships are important to me, or this romantic relationship is important to me and I want to pursue that, they can feel this disloyalty to the parent or the family. But these people need me, and if I'm putting this affection or this attention here, then mom doesn't get it, or dad doesn't get it, or the family doesn't get it. So that manifests itself in adult relationships as ambivalence. I really, really want to be with you, but at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, I'm not going to choose you, because I have to choose my family, or I have to choose my mom. Ken Adams, who has written a lot about emotional incest. Pat Love also wrote a lot about emotional incest, and her work is quite good. But Ken Adams says that the last and most difficult sacrifice for a parent to make for their child is to mourn the loss of the connection. I think about it with my kids. I'm on that cusp with my two boys. I'm no longer their hero. They no longer worship the ground I walk on. In fact, I'm quite lame now. The thing for me to do is to mourn that without them seeing that. I can't sit back and say, "Oh, why can't you be nice to me now?" Or "I miss the days when we were best friends." To their face, I need to celebrate their emancipation. And I have to turn to my partner, my therapist, and my support group and fall apart with my broken heart that these relationships are no longer what they were anymore. Because it's natural for them to move on. It's natural for them to shift their attachment focus. And that's part of what helps kids grow into healthy adults, is when the family supports that movement outside of the family system, and says, essentially, there's enough love to go around. You don't have to pick between the family and this other person. You do what you need to do, and we'll be here for you. So in adulthood, there can be a lot of anxiety, insecurity. We see a lot of, it's not uncommon to see like sex addiction issues come along with mother enmeshment. It's not in always, but oftentimes there can be that, I'm pushing the boundaries here in my secret sexual life, but to your face, I won't tell you no. It's really difficult for kids who grew up in enmeshed families or with an enmeshing parent to say no and to hold it and mean it. So that's a little glimpse. If you want a full look at this, the website overcomingenmeshment.com. That's Ken Adams' website. He has some really great videos, really great articles. The book Silently Seduced, When He's Married to Mom. And then I think Pat Love's book is called Emotional Incest Syndrome. I could be wrong, but those are good reasons.
I tend to differentiate a little bit between emotional incest, which is what Jon just talked about, and what I call covert incest, which has a really sexualized undertone to it. Kind of what I experienced as a kid, where my mother sat too close to me, and I was dragged to the movies because my father was unavailable. Often there's an unavailable or addicted parent, and the other parent reaches out to get his or her needs met from the child. And the child can be sexualized. There's sexualized comments on the developing body, and there's a lack of privacy and things like that. The word that Ken Adams always uses is it feels icky, and a lot of my childhood relationship with my mother felt icky. Also special, I got to do a lot. I got to go to movies that only adults went to. Other kids did. There were things that made me feel special, but it also felt icky, a little too much all the time. And this is another one that's very common among sex addicts, particularly male sex addicts, and female sex addicts, I think, is there was a sexualized element without actually being molested. But the impacts long-term are the same as if you were molested, because it's the same feelings and the same inability to discuss it, because the perpetrator is the person you would normally go to for help. So the impacts are severe sometimes.
Yeah, and I appreciate the distinction, because there is a difference. That covert incest does have more of the sexual overtones, and the bottom line is there's an intrusion on the body. There's an intrusion on that physical integrity. So as a child, even if I'm 3 years old, I have a right to turn to my parent and say, "Don't sit so close to me. I'm uncomfortable." And the parent needs to listen to that. Or the 11-year-old that doesn't want to be kissed goodbye on the way to school has a right to say, "Don't kiss me anymore. I don't like that." That's the parent's job to not only listen to the child and yield, but to develop appropriate boundaries themselves, so they're not pushing into that situation where the kid's put in a position to say, "Hey, you're making me feel weird and you need to stop it." And you're exactly right that the after effects of covert incest can be much like the after effects of actual molestation or, you know, non-covert incest, sexual incest, because the integrity of the body, the intrusion, the violation has occurred, and that wreaks havoc in a kid's mind.
Okay, let's jump to the next one. D-Day was 6 months ago. At the time, my husband was vague but admitted that he has a problem and that he knows he needs help for it. He said he did not feel like the behaviors were compulsive, but he admitted he had tried many times to stop, or that he did feel like the behaviors were compulsive. Sorry, and admitted he tried to stop. Now he says conflicting things, but mostly says he doesn't have a problem. He's showing up to therapy with the CSAT and attending 12-step groups online sporadically, but he's defensive and denying and blaming. I feel like he's on the fence about recovery. Any advice? I'm laughing because he's just a normal addict and new to recovery.
Your feeling of he's on the fence of recovery is right. I guess a couple pieces here, and I'll start with maybe some talking boundaries for you. I think just pointing to, when you do this, when I get this feeling from you, it makes me feel what I need instead, what I prefer instead is, would you be willing to help me out? Like, that's as far as your interaction goes with your partner. Because the second part is understanding the process of change. You know, every once in a while, I'm really lucky to get a client in my office who is dead committed to recovery, knows the path that they need to take, and there's very little like wrestling back and forth on, is this addiction, isn't, do I really need this? So that person who's just ready to go from day one, that's the exception to the rule. When it comes to change, there's some really predictable stages we go through, and it's maddening because working on change is like in the middle of that process. Most of the time people go through what we call pre-contemplations, where they don't even recognize there's a problem. Then they go into contemplation, where they might be starting to become aware that there's a problem, but there's still not a lot of buy-in. And then they go through a decision-making phase and an information gathering phase, where they decide, yes, this is a problem. And then they start gathering information about how they might want to change. I wish that these were linear and that there was no going back, like on a roller coaster. Like in recovery, you could hear that click as you progress. But oftentimes those first few stages of change are very cyclical for someone who's new to recovery. And so at the end of the day, I think it comes down to some decisions that your partner needs to make and some hard looks in the mirror. And, you know, again, the very best you can do is kind of that talking boundary. Let them know how you feel, and let them know specific behaviors that bring that feeling up in you. Ask for some help, ask for some change, but definitely get folded into your own process too. You may be further along in those stages of change and recognizing some of your needs and some of the support you have, and don't wait for your addicted partner to be in the same place. You can come to groups like this, you can get in your own 12-step groups, you can seek your own therapy to help you get peace of mind, even if your partner doesn't choose recovery. Dr. Rob's book, Dependency, is full of great solutions there and good information. The organization Smart Recovery Friends and Family it's another organization that I think is built more around that pro-dependency model, and helping you learn how to live a happy life regardless of what your spouse is choosing right now. And that's difficult, so much harder said than done.
You know, and as active addicts, we live in denial. We deny the problem. And we're not only lying to you, we're lying most of all to ourselves, and we believe our lies because we have to. And to debunk all of those lies, it's a slow process. And 1 minute we're like, yeah, I'm a mess. And the next minute we're like, no, everything's fine. And it's fairly normal to go back and forth. I know I did. You know, and it took me a while to admit that to make the 12-inch drop from the head to the heart is what my therapist called it at the time. You know, I understood it in my head that I was an addict, but it needed to drop into my heart that I was an addict before I was really willing to fully commit. And it took some time. It took more than 6 months for me. And I think it does for a lot of guys. So. Yeah. What are
Yeah.
some self-care responses to broken boundaries besides sleeping in another room? My spouse is quick to sleep on the couch whenever I express negative feelings or mention broken boundaries. Good question.
Yeah. So I really love the paradigm around self-care that's not just about um, this is what I'm going to do, or the paradigm around boundaries, that it's not about punishment. It's about a commitment to address what the problem is. So sleeping on the couch, the problem may be, you hurt me and you don't get it and you keep kind of coming at me. So please go sleep on the couch. I need some space. That's where I see that coming in, or that separation of, Dr. Rob talks about this in Out of the Doghouse. The dog goes out to the doghouse when it needs to get the message, like, you've really messed up and you need to, the relationship's on the line. I think some other good responses or some good consequences of that kind of boundary violation, one of them could be, when this kind of boundary violation occurs, I need you to come with me to a marital session. We need to talk about it. We need to process this. When this kind of boundary violation occurs, I'm going to ask you to call a support person in your recovery world. I'm going to ask you to talk to them about what's happening and what you are feeling. And I'm going to do the same. It may be, I'm going to take a timeout for, a couple hours, 24 hours, whatever that is. I'm going to gather my thoughts and my feelings. I'm going to write in my journal. And within 12, 24 hours, I need to come back with you, and I need you to listen to me as I talk to you about how I felt and what happened. It may be that depending on what the boundary violation is when this boundary is violated, I need to know what your sobriety status is, because this behavior is usually associated with you acting out. So I need a clear look at where you're at right now. There's a whole lot of options beyond just go in the other room. And in fact, sometimes that go in the other room or let's get some space, that can really prevent some of the work and some of the healing. And so I'd challenge you to think of maybe what's the underlying problem in that boundary violation, and what kind of responses actually kind of turn us back toward the problem in a way that helps us find solutions or resolution or understanding.
Yeah. Thank you, John. And this next question is basically the same question, but a different pattern. So I'm going to read it, and then if you want to add anything, but I think you just answered it. Do you have advice for me? My partner always walks out on me when I correct or ask him about something sensitive for him. He completely shuts down and literally leaves me for days or even more. This is very triggering for me. The good news is I'm getting through to him, and he wants to stop this pattern. What can I do to help him with this?
Yeah. So what's actually going on here is it's not so much about content or difficult things said. In these situations where somebody either literally or figuratively walks out of the room, it's a body problem. They're not regulated. I actually, my next appointment is with a couple, and I keep these handy little pulse oximeters in my office, and I make couples wear these on their fingers. It has an alarm that goes off when your heart rate gets to 100 beats a minute, because that means you're flooding and your body's no longer in the room. And I want couples to be really, really aware of that, because often they'll point to, well, you said this and that's not okay. That's not really what's going on. What's going on is something happened in your environment and your response was to greet it with a fight or flight response. And maybe it's not deserving of a fight or flight response. You wouldn't know, because you're not sitting around, or you're not staying around to actually check out what the threat is. So one of the ways that you can help is, number one, you might suggest that your partner talks to their therapist about this, and get some help from someone who's not you, because the stakes are high in these kind of conversations with you. Another one might be a commitment to each other. We're going to learn how to relax in each other's presence again. So that can be a focus on emotion regulation together. I have a few couples that I work with right now where they do yoga classes together, by video, but they're side by side and they're learning how to breathe and relax in each other's presence. I have a couple right now that they're working on some safe touch signals, Touch is really fraught in this relationship, and I asked them each to come up with a way that their partner could reach out and give some physical contact that's not overbearing or sexualized, but is simply, this is the way that I tell you I'm here for you. Come to me if you want to, basically. So there's all sorts of things that you can do to help. Just remember that the problem is not with what you're saying. The problem is your partner can't stay regulated throughout. So, as you focus on that part, or as your partner focuses on that part of the pattern, you'll see that their ability to tolerate some of these tougher discussions increases, because their body, they're keeping their heart rate down, they're keeping their breathing regulated as things get emotionally intense.
Thank you. And it's mentioned here, we have lots of partners groups on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. We have partners groups for women, we have partners groups for men, and we have partners groups for everybody. And then we have groups like this one, where partners and addicts and couples can come on individually or together, which a lot of times we get couples on together, which I think is really cool. So there's lots of support for betrayed partners as well as addicts on our site. Hello guys, female Narcotics Anonymous, recovering addict, 2.5 years clean, going through my second breakup during the pandemic with my 2-year-old relationship with another recovering addict. So we jumped into a relationship in early recovery as 2 newcomers and managed to stick it out during 2 years. When the pandemic hit, things started going downhill. I understand we brought a lot of baggage into the relationship as newly recovering addicts. When the pandemic hit, I became very needy, demanding, controlling, angry, not respecting his clearly stated need for space, because my fear of abandonment got triggered and pushed him away now for the second time. My sponsor said we became addicted to breaking up and getting back together. I'm in no contact now for 11 days. Apparently I have anxious attachment style and he is avoidant. Conflicts hits and he ran now for the second time. I feel he walks away when I need him most. Any advice? There's a lot packed into that one too.
Yeah, there's a lot there. And Scott, if you don't mind, I'm going to quote you on this, and I'm going to invoke you. I've been reading Scott's meditation book, and it just so happens August 21st talks about this. And he talks in here about having a broken picker. And I'll just read a few highlighted portions here. One of the common traits of addicts is that we often draw people who are not available to us or who would reject and abuse us. That's a recapitulation of maybe some of the relationships we experienced before. Sometimes we can't allow ourselves to mix emotional intimacy and sex and physical intimacy together, and so we push and pull. Sometimes we search out people who we think we deserve. This is the kind of relationship that I'm good for, or this is what I'm worthy of, and we repeat these patterns. And he says at the end here, the good news is this type of healing and recovery is possible if we put in the effort. We can really find mutually loving, pro-dependent relationships we've been hoping for. And then the task for the day is put your romantic life on hold where you figure out how to correct the flaws in your approach. That would be the advice that I'd give there. Good on you for making it 11 days. That's really, really tough. When that feeling is, I've got to be with somebody, or I've got to be with the right person, or I'm not okay. A good detox is needed, and that's hard. I'd say keep reaching out to your sponsor and other safe, non-romantic interests, and just talk through what you're feeling. Talk through what you're experiencing. My guess is they've probably been there before, and you will make it out to the other side. It won't always feel this anxious, but the days right after a breakup can be really, really hard. I hope you can give yourself the gift of some time and perspective to let your body come down again, and so that you can maybe a little more fully evaluate what is this relationship, how am I in this relationship, and what do I really need. Relationships early in recovery are very, very difficult, because there's a lot wrapped up in there that as we get more well, we're recognizing we don't actually want that to be part of our relationships.
Yeah, and I would actually, we mentioned Dr. Rob's book, Pro-Dependence, several times today. I would suggest picking up a copy of that and just reading through it, because he talks about, how people like us, addicts and recovering addicts, and, we have trauma and things, how we can find healthy relationships and what we can do to change our approach. So yeah, and I'm glad you're here. You're in the right spot. You know. Next one, if my partner is enmeshed to his mom in a very strong relationship and he does not recognize this and he stays offended with me when I say this, what should I do?
So a couple of options. You can throw a Hail Mary and you can invite your spouse to read a book, or even more accessible, I mentioned the website overcomingenmeshment.com. Ask your spouse to watch it, or your partner to watch a video, and just see if it resonates. The other option, and where you'll probably end up regardless of your partner's reaction, is pick up the book When He's Married to Mom. There's a whole section in there for partners who are married to someone who's enmeshed. There's a whole recovery process for you, and a whole boundary and sanity producing process for you, that's important for you to engage in regardless of what your partner chooses. And that is available even if he doesn't see it or doesn't choose any kind of healing.
Yeah, for you, definitely pick up When He's Married to Mom by Ken Adams. Great book. Yeah, and you know, the thing about emotional incest and covert incest is we'll deny that it ever happened until somebody points it out. You know, my therapist like, wow, your mother was abusive. And I was like, no, she wasn't. Yeah, you were sexually abused. No, I wasn't. Read this book. You know, I read Silently Seduced. I was like, oh shit. You know, I went back. I was like, okay, let's talk. Because I just didn't see it.
It's a huge realization to take on.
And painful.
Yeah, you know, in my work with these guys, I don't fault any of them for having a hard time coming around to seeing it, because it's incredibly painful. But there are options for you as he, you know, struggles with that process of coming to grips with reality.
Yeah. Okay, this will be our last question here. I feel like every time I try to have a conversation with my spouse, he blows up, shuts down, or both. There never seems to be any resolution because it feels like a cycle. I try to talk and he distances, repeat forever. Do I wait for him to come to me? He never has in the past. He just distances and then blames me for the issues that never get resolved. What do I do?
Yeah, so keep coming to groups like this would be number one. This is a really good example of it's going to take a village to get your needs met. And so get a good village that you can have some of that intimacy and connection with, because you have a need for that. In absence of that village, that's when we keep reaching to who's available, whether they're actually, or who's around, whether they're available or not. I think another option, if you're not already, you might ask, hey, I've noticed this cycle about us. It's really distressing for me, and I'd like to be able to get out of this cycle. Would you be open to doing some marriage therapy with me so we can learn what's going on and how to not do this? And then, you know, finding a qualified marriage therapist in your area. Scott and the rest of the Seeking Integrity staff know therapists across the country, and can help point you in the right direction for that. But I think in this is a classic pursuit withdraw dynamic, and our tendency when somebody pulls away from us is to get closer, and that can actually exacerbate it. That can make it worse, not because you're wanting to, but because when you're in a retreat stance and somebody's coming at you, you'll retreat further. So when you say, do I wait for him to come to me? That's part of it. I think you work on standing still, regardless of whether he's coming to you or not. You work on staying in a grounded place and trying not to get caught up in that cycle. When you see it coming, take a time out. And you may even say, you know, feels like we're kind of in that phase that we do where there's a lot of blaming and we're not productive. And, you know, I'd rather not go the rounds on that and have the same result. I'm going to call a timeout right here. I'd love to talk with you about this with a marriage therapist, but work on you staying still. That'll make the decision, I think, a little clearer for him if he chooses to look at it.
Yeah, I think it's Sue Johnson who talks about the dance that we do when we have conflict in our relationship, and we know the steps really well, so we just keep doing the dance. And until you stop dancing and start talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're out of time, everybody. Thank you for bearing with us early with the weird technical glitch that I think is a Zoom thing. Zoom has made a lot of changes, and our last couple sessions have been hinky in one way or another. So thank you, everybody, for staying here with us today. Jon, what a great topic, you know, dependency to fear to control. I think almost everything we talked about today was related to that in one way or another, so thank you. Anything you want to say to take us out?
Thanks everybody for coming, and I'll be excited to be back on the second week of September.
See you later.